So the first question I have, which you already kind of answered, but can you tell me a little bit about your background as a teacher and, where you got your education, how long you've been teaching either here or other places?
Yeah. So I graduated from CU Boulder in December of 2012. And then I started working here January, the following month, working as a math teacher, 7th grade math. Then moved into 7th grade science math split, teaching math half the time and science half the time to the same students.
Okay.
And did that for, I think, 3 years. And then a full-time science spot opened up. And I've been working here. This is my second year doing this.
Okay.
And then next year, I'll be teaching full-time math. So just bouncing around.
Always changing.
Yeah.
Life of a teacher.
Yep, exactly.
Well, great. So can you tell me a little bit about your experiences working with emerging bilinguals or English language learners and the challenges and opportunities that you've had?
So right now in my classroom, I have, I think, 17 NEPs, I believe, 17 NEPs. And quite a few of those are students who speak very little English. And what I've found in the past, and that's generally pretty consistent with my past years, and what I've found in the past, as I was just telling you, is that I experienced a lot more success in teaching math, and that could be the style of teacher that I am, is that in math I can really tap into their visual skills, right? The fact that they really have to watch in order to know what's going on because there's so much about the language that they don't understand. So I tap into that with math, and I've had a lot of success with those students in growth over the year and MAP scores and PARCC scores as well. But I'm still struggling when it comes to science. It's so reading heavy, and I found ways to level readings. I give weekly homeworks based on students' reading level, and sometimes I can even find a Spanish version of that article, so the kids will read it in Spanish and then read the exact same article in English, and that English article is only at a 2nd or 3rd grade level. And then it has some comprehension questions along with it as well. So I've used that, but when it comes to actually assessing the learning in the classroom and having kids access that learning, I'm still struggling with that.
Yeah, still trying.
Yeah.
I'm sure it's a lifelong thing.
I'm sure.
So, what ways do you use to identify who in your classroom is an emergent bilingual, and how do you know their level of English proficiency? Like, do you have resources from the district? Do you have strategies that you use?
Yeah, I always start with what comes from the district. So they have their I think it's called a literacy plan. Okay. It'll be a flag in Infinite Campus that tells me what level NEP, LEP, FEP, or exited. So I start with that, and then I go to MAP scores. Okay. And that's a good way to not just tap into my emergent bilinguals, but everyone, given whether it's an IEP that they're on or whatever reason, I can find out what reading level they're at and start from there. So that's the resource I use, I guess.
What about so you mentioned that you use the leveled text, so how do you kind of assess what level works best for the students in your class? How have you done that?
I use maps.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. and I tell them that too, and it's a way for them to know their MAP score, know what it means, and then they take that test 3 times a year, and hopefully take a little bit more ownership in it if they know that the readings that I'm giving them are working towards that, but also a result of that. So they know that, okay, this is the box that I'm in for now, but through doing these readings or through doing that test really well, I can level up. I can get out of this if this is too easy. So I have strategies and those are homeworks usually. I have strategies for leveling kids up. If they're showing like 100% on those comprehension quizzes, then I'll level them
Take
up.
them to the next level. Well, that's good. And so that's nice to know that the MAP scores have been helpful in that way.
Yeah.
This is a question that we're asking the teachers because we're interested in how many teachers receive this information. Do you know how emergent bilingual students are redesignated in your district? Like when they move between levels, between FEP and NEP and LEP, do they tell you how that's decided? Do you know?
I feel like I do.
I don't know.
Okay. I think it has to do with their access scores, right? I think that's a big part of it is working towards that and leveling up on the different domains of language, the hearing, the reading, writing, speaking.
Okay, great.
So I think that's a big part. I don't know if there's some other. I'm trying not to look at him for advice, but I don't know if there's some other.
It's not a test, though.
Right. Like evaluation, maybe more informal that the English language department does.
Okay, perfect.
Here. So,
yeah,
I think it's access testing.
We sort of felt like that information was important for teachers to have, but had the suspicion that many teachers didn't know, right. Because you're looking at your content progress more than having to think about that. So that's good to know. So to what extent do you incorporate, as a science teacher, what extent do you incorporate English language development instruction for your emergent bilinguals into your daily schedule? So you talked about the homeworks and the reading assignments. So that's obviously an example. But other strategies that you use maybe just in the classroom for English language development at the same time that you're doing content?
And I'm going to be honest, because this is the reason I joined the program is because it's an afterthought. Yeah. Not because I don't think that it's important. It's because of all the things, developing my own curriculum and putting everything together with that. And I'm sure whoever's listening to this doesn't need to hear the woes of a teacher, but of like. Oh,
we do, because you guys don't get enough chance to voice it.
Well, it's just like of all those things. Yeah. Unfortunately, the last thing I think of, if I have time for it, is I've made this thing. Yeah. Rather than just hope that, especially when I think about this kid Daniel or this kid Edward, just hoping that someone next to them is going to be able to translate it out for them or this or that. Like, if there's time, I'll think of something to do. Sure. So, like in the lesson you see today, you'll see there are questions that go along with the activity we're doing. So you'll see sentences with blanks, and then for kids to fill it out based on the simulation.
Nice.
But again, that's always an afterthought. It's always like, I don't have enough experience in it.
For sure.
Let alone the time to do those things well. Yeah. I will say that I feel a lot more comfortable doing that in math. Mainly because there's so many resources. I know the book that we have has an online Spanish version of it. And I love to use that because I don't care in which language the students get it. That they're at least absorbing the material and even practicing their Spanish and finding Spanish academic vocabulary as well, I think is really good. Yeah. There are a couple other things I've just sort of tried as a whim. There was one time where for some reason I had a Spanish set of notes that I had written up for the meanings of symbols in a pedigree, like a family tree. Nice. And when I was presenting it to the kids, instead of giving them the English notes, I had the Spanish notes on the board, and I embarrassed myself by reading them out loud, and then just asked, so I'd say, what a square means in a pedigree in Spanish, and I'd say it in Spanish, and then after that I'd be like, okay, what does a square mean? And they'd say men, it means a man, because I said los hombres, and so it was sort of like, it was a little... cliche maybe, but it was just a way for me to say, hey, now the people who know Spanish are at an advantage where they know something the rest of us don't. We're going to use them. The problem is that's sort of artificial because there's nothing about pedigrees that is Spanish related. It was just the notes that I have.
Yeah, but it's symbolic. It's just that acknowledgement and recognition that means something to the students. So that's really nice. So I imagine that you have, you don't just have different levels of students in terms of academic content, but also different levels then in terms of language. So what strategies do you use to modify your curriculum for the different levels that you have? Or do you group students? What do you do in the classroom to just kind of balance that out?
Yeah, I focus more on the NEPs, the ones that I know just aren't even going to access anything about it, and I differentiate for that first, and then the in-betweens are sometimes sort of a mixed match of like seeing if they can handle this, and sometimes they can, but sometimes they need some help, so I'll give them a version of that differentiated thing. But as far as like grouping them, I haven't figured it out yet.
Sure, yeah.
So I definitely, like today we're getting new seats, and I have a kid who speaks only Farsi, sitting next to a girl who is not an English language learner, but needs a lot of accommodations for her IEP. So they're sitting next to each other. They've got the accommodation for today, and they're next to each other, so I can check in with them easier. And I got a similar table over there, and I'll point them out to you during the observation.
Perfect. Yeah, that's great.
But yeah, I guess I would, as far as differentiating goes, I think I look to those NEPs first. Yeah. Like I said, if there's time. Yeah. And then I imagine if I were better at this and I had more time, I could look at the nuances between that bottom level and that regular grade level.
And it sounds like you're always actively observing and making those adaptations in the moment. So even if you don't necessarily have time to plan for them from the start, which I know the reality of a teacher's schedule and workload. And so just being actively observing and looking for those things, I think, is a real positive. So to what extent do you assess your emerging bilingual students in areas of language and reading? I feel like you did answer that in your leveled readings.
In reading, yeah.
Yeah.
Is that the question, just reading?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it asks in language as well if there's something else that you would add to that you do to maybe oral language with the students, if at all.
Yeah. Not really.
Yeah. That's totally fine. How do you incorporate your students' culture and home language into the school day, if at all, if there's opportunities to do that?
I do sometimes. I've tried this experiment as far as grouping, where I'll have an exited student who's very fluent in both languages sit next to someone who can't understand even like the warm-up. You won't see that in fifth hour today, but very often the only people who have sort of permission to talk during the beginning of class are those people who sit next to them, and all they're doing is just translating the warm-up into Spanish.
Oh, nice.
And I'm not sure, because it could have been lost in translation, but my hope is that the students understand that they can answer that in Spanish. They can answer that question in Spanish and discuss it with their shoulder partner in Spanish, but also listening to how, when we share out, listening to how people answer it in English.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, that's nice. I like that. I'm getting lost in my questions. So in the case that you have any students who are identified as emerging bilingual or English language learner and as a student with an IEP for some sort of special need, I don't know if you have any students in that situation, but if so, how do you adapt the instruction taking into consideration that they have both of those needs to be addressed?
Yeah, well, obviously, like, you have to follow what's in the IEP, right? Those accommodations. And I'm not saying that an IEP is the same as learning the language.
Sure.
But sometimes the accommodations can overlap.
Okay.
Right? So I could look at what this student needs in order to access or in order to show their understanding. And it could be that it's going to help not only in their language, but also in their IEP.
Do you feel that some of the IEPs that you've had do address the aspect of language?
Yeah.
They do? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at some of the accommodations for IEPs, it's leveled text is definitely one of them. like sentence frames, or a lot of times it's like chunked instructions is definitely good for I think both types of learners, is to wrap your head around just one thing at a time. Yeah,
that's good to know. And what strategies, if any, are you using to involve parents in the school, in the student school community? I realize that that's, you know, a constraint sometimes, especially at the secondary level, to work with parents. But do you have any opportunities to work with parents? If so, what are those? Or are you thinking about anything?
When it comes to math, excuse me, I remember a colleague of mine. We had brought in a bunch of parents, and now this wasn't for just the English language learners. This was for everyone, and we brought them in to talk about sort of based on MAP scores, where their kids were at. And we had sort of an overall presentation about, like, you know, in a very positive way, like, this is where your kid's at, and we want to do what we can in order to bring them up, and here are some ways to do that. So that was years ago that we did that, but that's, I think, much easier to do in math than it is in science. I do have a lot of contact home. For those homeworks, like, so if kids aren't doing those homeworks, I mean, the parents have to sign them, and that's a way for parents to check in with their students and be like, this reading is about walking whales. Like, how does that, what is that about? How does that have anything to do with what you're learning? So I sort of use that as a way to bring parents into the fold of, hey, this is what we're learning. Ask your kids about it. What does it mean? How does it connect to what we're learning? So I connect with them in that way. They have to sign it, and then if the kids aren't bringing in homeworks, I make phone calls, I send out emails, and sometimes it's a conversation of, look, I'm giving this to your student to really help them grow. Here's, like, this isn't just everyone gets the same article, you got to do it. I put in the work to best help your kid.
Definitely.
And oftentimes it's like the parents didn't know, and so having that contact gets them more involved. It's not the case that they don't believe in it or anything like that. So
and I know that it's just a major challenge at the secondary level, because there's that built-in involvement in some ways, the elementary level, because parents have to be more, they have to pick up the kid, drop off the kid, and they're younger, and so they're more worried about it. And at some age, parents are like, you're on your own.
It's called middle school for a reason.
Okay, so the last few questions I have are just about the program, the master's program. So obviously you've only done one course, so it's not an evaluation of the program in general, but for the course that you have taken, how would you rate it on a scale of 1 to 4 in terms of the quality? 1 being the lowest and 4 being the highest, and why? Quality of the class, what you've gotten out of it, if it's been a good learning experience, if you think that it's been worth it.
Oh yeah, I definitely think it's worth it. I'd give it a 4. There's nothing really about it that I would think would need to change, and I'd like to see, and part of that actually has to do with assumptions I'm making about the future of the program, right? Like when I think about the support that I'm expecting or hoping to get in terms of strategies and this and that, I sort of know that that's not really covered in this first class.
Sure.
So I'm sort of expecting that will come later.
Yeah.
But as far as what I know this class to be about and its purpose, I've loved it. I think it's really changed a lot of ways of thinking for me, as well as validate some other things. So
what types of things do you feel like it has changed for you or validated?
Well, it's definitely validated ideas I've had about the history of historically underserved groups in education, right? Like the history of legislation and the reasons behind why we do the things we do. But so it's validated a lot of ideas I've already had, but then also changed some of the ways on how to deal with those things. I've sort of always thought like, if you want to learn a language, right? And I'm speaking as a 29-year-old. How old am I? I don't know. 29-year-old, white male thinking
you could
like
say any number, and I don't know.
I'd be like, I'd go to another country and be submerged or immersed in that culture and that language, and then for sheer like, sink or swim, I would have to figure it out.
Yeah.
And so there were things I thought cognitively about the best way to learn a language, and those ideas have definitely changed.
Yeah.
Both in the cognitive science, but also just in the emotional lives of these kids, what it means to them to get a firm footing in one language and then use that to
absolutely
find another
language. No, that's a great point. I'm glad that comes through in the class.
It does.
And the professor, how was the professor maybe in relation to other professors you've had in the past, or what have your experiences been?
It's been a long time since I've had a professor, so...
Can you remember?
Yeah. No.
Probably very different kinds if you studied science. I mean, did you say science at CU?
Yeah.
I can just imagine it was a different
type
of instruction too.
Definitely. And, my perception of, like, my attitude towards learning, I think now is much like I want to be here learning this stuff. Whereas, so many years ago, you probably couldn't say the same. Like, my openness and engagement in it is a lot different. So I don't know how I could compare her to other professors, but she's a great teacher.
Good.
She makes available those opportunities for us to learn this stuff, and I like that. I sort of maybe painted myself as like the ignorant bigot from the beginning, sort of. When I sort of like brought up these ideas of like, what is the best way to learn a new language?
Yeah.
Shouldn't we be like giving them English the whole time? And I like that she was very open-minded to that, right? And she accepted that we're all coming from different places, and the point of this program is not to just get rid of those ways of thinking, but it's to shed light on the evidence and the studies so that we can change our own thinking. And that's the thing I've liked about her most, is that she's just facilitating this growth for us to do ourselves.
Great.
And clearly she has very strong opinions about that, and that comes through. Sure. But not in a way where I don't feel like my opinions are respected.
And that's good, because especially as professionals, like you said, you're all there, you're making the decision to do this in your very limited free time. So that's great to hear. So the last thing is just really, this is kind of a hard question to ask now, but if there's anything that you would suggest, like your expectations for the course, like anything the courses, the master's program, your things that you might suggest could be improved. I know it's like kind of hard now because you might not see what could be improved yet, but just anything we should be thinking of, like, even if it's scheduling or just something, what should we keep in mind, from your perspective for the future of the course to make it better?
I do like that. I think there was some feedback given in the last cohort about the final portfolio. Okay. And I think David Nieto, he came to us the first night and said, hey, there were some people upset last year about this portfolio, and so what or just they felt unprepared for it, and so right now we're giving you everything that's expected for it. So I have a feeling that change is going to be appreciated.
Nice.
I can't really foresee what sorts of things.
I know you've just with one class, so.
Yeah.
But is there any, like, you did mention that your expectations for the class, your evaluation of the course now is based on your expectations of maybe what's to come. So I think you were hinting at more like practical strategies focus in some of the future classes that you're hoping for? Did I interpret that right?
Yeah. I think I am pretty sure, based on looking at the courses, that there's, and the practicum that comes near the end, is that it's all about, okay, now that I've learned all this stuff, how am I going to actually integrate it, and doing my own research into what types of strategies yield the most growth academically, linguistically, things like that.
Perfect. The application. Is there anything else you'd like to say before we finish?
I don't think so.
Okay, thank you so much.
Cool,
I appreciate it.
Yeah.